The city never truly slept. Skyline glowed at all hours, a shimmering crown of wealth and ambition. But in the penthouse of the Marwood Tower, one of the city's most powerful men sat in darkness. Alexander Can, billionaire tech mogul, media darling, visionary entrepreneur. To the world, he was invincible. But tonight, he was crumbling. The boardroom war had drained him. His wife had left him. His only son hadn't spoken to him in months. For the first time in decades, Alexander Kane didn't feel in control. He sat slumped on the edge of his leather sofa, staring at the untouched glass of scotch on the table. His hands trembled as he whispered to himself, "Someone, please, just fix this." Down on the street among the forgotten sat Daniel Cross. His world was a cardboard mat, a patched coat, and a paper cup for change. He hadn't been home in years, not since tragedy pulled the floor out from under him. But what Daniel lacked in possessions, he carried in wisdom, sharpened by suffering. That night, sheltering beneath the glowing tower, Daniel heard the faint sound of a man's voice carried by the wind through an open window. "Fix this." Daniel tilted his head, curious. A billionaire's cry for help? In his world, that was something you didn't hear every day. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Funny. Richest man in the city, begging for help. And here I am with nothing. But maybe I can. The next morning, Alexander stormed out of his tower, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He barked orders into his phone, trailed by assistants, and there, leaning casually against the marble wall, was Daniel. His eyes, clear, steady, full of something Alexander hadn't seen in years, locked onto him. "You said you needed help," Daniel said calmly. Alexander stopped cold. "Excuse me?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I heard you last night," he said. "Someone should fix it." "Well," he spread his arms. "I can fix it." The billionaire stared, incredulous. "You? A homeless man? Fix my problems?" Daniel shrugged. "Why not? Your money's bought you everything but peace. You've tried it your way. Maybe try mine." Alexander's aides laughed, but the billionaire raised a hand. Something about the man's tone, unshaken, almost fatherly, pulled at him. "Fine," Alexander muttered. "You've got one chance. Meet me tomorrow, 9 a.m. my office. If you don't show, I'll forget this ever happened." Daniel nodded. "I'll be there." For the first time in years, Alexander felt curious, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt needed. The city never truly slept. Skyline glowed at all hours, a shimmering crown of wealth and ambition. But in the penthouse of the Marwood Tower, one of the city's most powerful men sat in darkness. Alexander Kane, billionaire tech mogul, media darling, visionary entrepreneur. To the world, he was invincible. But tonight, he was crumbling. The boardroom war had drained him. His wife had left him. His only son hadn't spoken to him in months. For the first time in decades, Alexander Kane didn't feel in control. He sat slumped on the edge of his leather sofa, staring at the untouched glass of scotch on the table. His hands trembled as he whispered to himself, "Someone, please, just fix this." Down on the street among the forgotten sat Daniel Cross. His world was a cardboard mat, a patched coat, and a paper cup for change. He hadn't been home in years, not since tragedy pulled the floor out from under him. But what Daniel lacked in possessions, he carried in wisdom, sharpened by suffering. That night, sheltering beneath the glowing tower, Daniel heard the faint sound of a man's voice carried by the wind through an open window. "Fix this." Daniel tilted his head, curious. A billionaire's cry for help? In his world, that was something you didn't hear every day. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. Funny. Richest man in the city, begging for help. And here I am with nothing. But maybe I can. The next morning, Alexander stormed out of his tower, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. He barked orders into his phone, trailed by assistants, and there, Leaning casually against the marble wall was Daniel, his eyes clear, steady, full of something Alexander hadn't seen in years, locked onto him. "You said you needed help," Daniel said calmly. Alexander stopped cold. "Excuse me?" Daniel smiled faintly. "I heard you last night," he said. "Someone should fix it." "Well?" He spread his arms. "I can fix it." The billionaire stared, incredulous. "You? A homeless man? Fix my problems?" Daniel shrugged. "Why not? Your money's bought you everything but peace. You've tried it your way. Maybe try mine." Alexander's aides laughed, but the billionaire raised a hand. Something about the man's tone, unshaken, almost fatherly, pulled at him. "Fine," Alexander muttered. "You've got one chance. Meet me tomorrow. 9 a.m. my office. If you don't show, I'll forget this ever happened." Daniel nodded. "I'll be there." For the first time in years, Alexander felt curious, and for the first time in years, Daniel felt needed. The next morning, Alexander expected Daniel to show up later. Not at all. Instead, when he walked into his office at 7 a.m., Daniel was already there. He'd made himself comfortable by the window, sipping plain black coffee Lydia had reluctantly given him. "You're early," Alexander muttered. Daniel smiled. "You're late. The sun's been up for 2 hours." That's when the city's most alive before the noise drowns it. Alexander set down his briefcase, exhaling. "Fine. Impress me. What's your first grand idea? How do you plan to fix my life in a week?" Daniel set his cup aside. His tone was calm, almost casual, but his words carried weight. "Start small. Fix something you've ignored for too long." Alexander rolled his eyes. "Don't ignore things. I delegate. I hire the best people in the world to deal with problems." Daniel leaned forward, voice low. "And yet here you are, asking a man with nothing to fix everything." It silenced him. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a battered notepad, slid it across the desk. "Write down 3 things. Not business issues, not stock. Prices, personal things. Problems you've pushed away because they don't make money." Alexander frowned. "This is absurd." Daniel shrugged, then walked away. "But remember you gave me a week?" Reluctantly, Alexander picked up a pen. His hand hovered over the page before he finally scribbled. "My son, Matthew, won't return my calls. Haven't spoken to my brother in 6 years. I don't sleep." He slid the pad back. Daniel glanced at it, nodded once, and said, "Good, now we start." Alexander frowned. "You think you can fix a broken relationship with a pen and paper?" Daniel chuckled. "No, but naming what's broken is the first repair. You can't fix what you refuse to see." Then he tapped the first line. "Your son, call him." Alexander stiffened. "That's complicated." Daniel gave him a firm look. "Everything worth fixing is." That night, for the first time in months, Alexander dialed his son's number. It rang once, twice, straight to voicemail. He almost hung up, but then Daniel's voice echoed in his mind. "Start small. Fix what you've ignored." So he left a message. His words stumbled, uncertain, but raw. "Hey, Matt, I know I've messed up. I'd like to see you. No business. Just us. Call me back, please." When he hung up, he felt something strange in his chest. Not victory, not relief. Something quieter. A beginning. The next day, Alexander admitted it to Daniel. "I called him, left a message. No reply." Daniel just smiled. "That's a fix. You turn silence into a thread. Keep pulling." On the 3rd morning, Daniel gave another task. "Sleep without your phone." One night, Alexander scoffed. "That's ridiculous. I run a global company. I need to be reachable." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "And yet the world ran fine before cell towers." "The world will live without you for 8 hours." Against every instinct, Alexander tried it. He put his phone in the kitchen, lay in bed with nothing but silence, and for the first time in years, he slept 6 straight hours. When he woke, he couldn't explain why tears stung his eyes. By the end of the week, Alexander looked at Daniel differently. This wasn't a joke anymore. "Daniel, hadn't touched his millions, hadn't asked for a dime. But somehow, with scraps of wisdom and simple challenges, he'd given Alexander something money never had: clarity. Finally, Alexander asked the question that had been burning in him since day one. Why are you helping me? What's in it for you? Daniel looked out the window, eyes distant. His voice was quiet, because once someone said to me, I can fix it, and they did, until life took them away.
Ow!
It's my turn. For the first time, Alexander realized this man carried a story, one that might hold the very lesson he'd been searching for years. Alexander Kane had believed power came from scale bigger projects, bigger mergers, bigger profits. Yet here was Daniel Cross, a man with no bank account, showing him that sometimes the smallest steps created the greatest impact. Lesson 1. Eat with someone who isn't paid to sit with you. It was Daniel's idea. Alexander resisted at first. His lunches were usually working meals with lawyers, analysts, or investors. But one afternoon, Daniel suggested something different. Go down to the cafeteria. Sit with one of your employees. Ask them about their life, not their work. It sounded absurd, but Alexander tried it. He chose a young man cleaning tables. The employee froze when the billionaire sat across from him. But Alexander forced a smile. I'm Alex, he said awkwardly. What's your name? The young man blinked. James, sir? He talked about James's family, his mother's health, his struggle to pay tuition for night classes. Alexander really listened for the first time in years. Later, Daniel asked him, how did it feel? Alexander admitted, almost in a whisper, human. Lesson 2. Give without expecting return. A few days later, Daniel nudged Alexander into something even stranger. Pick someone. A stranger. Do something for them. But don't let them know it was you. So Alexander paid off James's tuition anonymously. He never said a word. But when he saw James crying quietly in the break room, phone in hand as he told his mother he could finally finish school, something cracked inside Alexander. It was fulfillment, pure and unpolished, like any quarterly gain he'd ever celebrated. Lesson 3. Make peace, not deals. On Friday, Daniel pushed him toward the hardest task yet. Call your brother. Alexander bristled. Daniel, you don't understand. My brother and I, things were said. Lines were crossed. We're done. Daniel tilted his head. And yet you still bring him up. That means you're not done. Call him. Took Alexander 2 hours of pacing. Pouring whiskey, setting the phone down, picking it back up, but finally, he pressed dialed. The conversation wasn't smooth. There were long silences. But by the end of it, they agreed to meet for coffee. It was more than he thought possible. When he told Daniel, the man simply smiled. See? A little fix. But you feel lighter, don't you? Alexander nodded. The first time in decades, he felt like his wealth wasn't the only thing he had to offer. But Alexander's world wasn't just blit, was empire-sized. And soon, Daniel's small lessons began bleeding into the boardroom during a high-stakes meeting about a billion-dollar acquisition. Alexander stunned his executives by pushing aside the spreadsheets. Tell me, he asked his VP, how will this affect the people on the ground? Their families? Their lives? The room went silent. Nobody had ever heard him speak that way. It wasn't just about profit anymore. It was about people. That night, after another lesson-filled day, Alexander finally asked Daniel the question that gnawed at him. Why me? Could walk into anyone's life. Why mine? Daniel hesitated, staring at the city lights. His voice dropped to a near whisper. Because you remind me of the man I almost became. A man who thought winning meant never losing anyone. But I was wrong. Lost everything. If I can stop you from walking that same path, then maybe I'll have fixed something bigger than myself. For the first time in years, Alexander Kane, the billionaire titan, sat in silence. Humbled not by wealth, but by wisdom from a man who had nothing. And deep down, he realized Daniel wasn't just fixing small cracks. He was rebuilding Alexander's soul. For weeks, Alexander had been letting Daniel's lessons guide him. Small repairs were happening in his life, bridges mended, nights of rest reclaimed, even moments of unexpected joy. But empires don't sleep, and neither do vultures. It began with a headline: Kane Industries under investigation for fraudulent practices. Alexander nearly dropped his coffee when Lydia stormed into his office with the newspaper. "Alex, it's everywhere. Is launching a full-scale investigation. They're calling board members. Stocks are plummeting." He skimmed the article, words like embezzlement, illegal accounting, offshore laundering, all of it tied to his company. By noon, 3 major investors had withdrawn. By evening, news anchors were speculating on the inevitable fall of Alexander Kane. His first instinct was rage. He barked orders, called lawyers, slammed fists on the table, but Daniel just watched quietly from the corner. When the chaos settled, Daniel finally spoke. "This is it. Your breaking point." Alexander wheeled on him. "You think this is a lesson? My empire is burning, Daniel. My name is in shreds. I could lose everything." Daniel didn't flinch. "Then maybe it's time to ask yourself what everything really is." That night, Alexander didn't sleep. His mind replayed the collapse of decades of work. He thought of his brother, who had just agreed to meet. He thought of Matthew, who still hadn't returned his call. He thought of James, the employee who now had tuition because of him. For the first time, he wondered, if I lose the billions, what's left of me? The next morning, Daniel gave him a challenge. "Don't fight the storm head-on. Step back. Find the truth." Alexander scowled. "The truth won't stop the bleeding, won't it?" Daniel countered. "Storms only destroy what isn't built to last." Over the next week, while lawyers scrambled and board members panicked, Alexander did something no one expected. He started digging himself. Not through legal loopholes, not through PR strategies, but through people. He met with employees across departments, asking questions executives had never asked. And slowly, the picture came together. The fraud wasn't his doing. It was a scheme by a trusted CFO. A man Alexander had shielded from scrutiny for years. When the proof surfaced, Alexander had a choice: bury it quietly to protect the company's image, or bring it into the light and risk total collapse. Late that night, he asked Daniel, "If I expose this, the empire could crumble. If I hide it, I stay safe. What would you do?" Daniel looked at him steadily. "Fix it, not for your empire, for you. For every person who works for you, for every life you touch, fix it the right way." Alexander swallowed hard. For once, money couldn't shield him. This was about character. The breaking point had come. And this time, Kane was ready to face it. The morning of the board meeting arrived like a looming execution. Porters crowded outside Kane's tower, cameras flashing as Alexander entered. His company's fate, his legacy. His identity, all would be decided in the next few hours. Inside the mahogany boardroom, the atmosphere was thick with fear. Executives whispered, eyes darting at one another, waiting for their billionaire leader to tell them how he'd make the scandal disappear. But when Alexander walked in, there was no firestorm of orders, no slammed fists. He looked calm. Daniel's words echoed in his head: "Fix it, the right way." The CFO sat at the far end, smug and unshaken. He believed Alexander would protect him, as always, to keep the empire untarnished. Alexander took his seat, spread a stack of documents across the polished table, and said words nobody expected. "These are the files proving where the fraud came from." It wasn't the company as a whole. It was one man. Gasps rippled around the table. The CFO stiffened, face turning pale. Alexander's voice hardened. "For years, I let loyalty blind me. I protected him because I thought it would protect us. But all it did was rot us from the inside. No more." E slid the papers forward. "This evidence is going to the authorities. Today, chaos erupted. You can't do this," one board member shouted. "This will destroy us," cried another. But Alexander stood firm. "If we survive, we survive. Clean. If we fall with our integrity intact. No more shadows, no more masks." The CFO was escorted out before noon, furious and shouting threats. Porters smelled blood, and within hours, headlines exploded. Kane exposes his own CFO. In fraud scandal takes fall to rebuild trust. Stocks tanked further. Investors panicked. Lawsuits loomed, but something else happened too. Workers began writing anonymous letters to Alexander's office, notes of gratitude, of respect. Thank you for standing up for us. You did the right thing. For once, I'm proud of who I work for. For the first time, Alexander felt like more than a name on a skyscraper. That evening, he and Daniel sat on the rooftop again, watching the city lights flicker. I might lose everything, Alexander muttered. Daniel smiled. Faintly? Or maybe you've just found it. Alexander frowned. Found what? The one thing money can't buy, character. And as the night stretched on, Alexander realized something profound. This wasn't the end of his empire. It was the beginning of him. Weeks passed after Alexander Kane's shocking decision to expose his own CFO. The empire was shaky, investors. Still jittery, but something unexpected began to grow in the cracks stressed. For the first time in years, employees looked at their billionaire boss, not with fear, but with respect. The call with his brother Alexander kept his promise to Daniel. One chilly morning, he walked into a quiet cafe downtown and saw his younger brother, Michael, waiting by the window. They hadn't spoken in nearly a decade. Old betrayals, business disputes, and pride had split them apart. Michael looked up, guarded. I almost didn't come. Alexander sat down, nervous for the first time in years. Neither did I. There was a long silence, then Alexander blurted out, I messed up. I let money matter more than you. I'm sorry. Michael stared, stunned. The Alexander he knew never apologized. Slowly, his brother's shoulders softened. You sound different. I'm trying to be, Alexander admitted. It wasn't a perfect reunion, but when they left, Michael clapped a hand on his shoulder. Let's not waste another 10 years. For Alexander, that small touch felt like a mountain had been moved. The visit to Matthew a week later. Alexander finally visited his estranged son. Matthew opened the door cautiously, arms crossed. You finally show up, Matthew said bitterly. Alexander nodded, guilt written on his face. I know, and I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want to try. Can we talk? Conversation was rough. Years of hurt couldn't be erased overnight, but by the end, Matthew agreed to meet again. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet. It was a start. Later, Alexander told Daniel, I feel like I'm rebuilding a house I abandoned long ago. Daniel just grinned. One brick at a time. Redemption in business. Public trust in Kane Industries was still fragile, but Alexander changed how he ran things. Instead of hiding behind lawyers and PR firms, he started holding open forums with employees. He walked the factory floors. He asked real questions and listened to the answers. One day, James, the young janitor whose tuition Alexander had secretly approached him nervously. Sir, I just wanted to say, thank you. I'll be the first in my family to graduate. Alexander swallowed hard, a lump forming in his throat. For once, a single thank you meant more to him than any shareholder's applause. Daniel's shadow yet. As Alexander's life was being repaired, he began to notice something strange. Daniel was becoming quieter, almost distant at times. One night, on the rooftop, Alexander asked, You've helped me fix so much, but what about you? What's your story? Daniel's eyes darkened. My story's not what matters. Yours does. But I want to know. Daniel hesitated, then said softly, Let's just say I had everything once. And I lost it because I couldn't do what you're doing now. I couldn't fix myself in time. Alexander wanted to press further, but Daniel stood, patting his shoulder. Focus on redemption, Alex. That's your task. Mine is almost done. The words haunted Alexander. Almost done, for the first time. Alexander wondered if Daniel had come into his life not just to help him, but to heal something within himself too. And that truth was about to surface in a way Alexander never expected. Alexander couldn't shake Daniel's words. Mine is almost done. For weeks, Daniel had been the anchor, the voice of wisdom, the strange yet steady presence who'd turned a billionaire's crumbling empire into a man's redemption story. But who was he? The unexpected disappearance one morning, Alexander arrived at Kane Tower and noticed something unusual. Daniel wasn't at his usual spot by the rooftop garden. He wasn't waiting in the lobby. He wasn't anywhere concerned. Alexander asked security to check the cameras. Nothing. Daniel hadn't entered the building at all, for the first time. Alexander felt panic, not about his fortune, not about the markets, but about losing the man who had become his guide. He ordered his driver to comb the streets near the shelter Daniel often mentioned. Finally, late at night, they found him sitting on a curb near a boarded-up church. Staring at the ground, the past unveiled Daniel. Alexander rushed out, kneeling beside him. "Where have you been? Scared me?" Daniel glanced up, weary. His eyes looked older, heavier than ever. "You weren't supposed to find me here." "Of course I was," Alexander shot back. "You think I'd just let you disappear? Who are you really, Daniel?" For a long moment, silence stretched. Then Daniel finally spoke. "My name is Daniel Morris. 10 years ago, I was a CEO, too, of a tech company worth billions. I had a wife, a daughter, and I lost it all." Alexander's chest tightened. "What happened?" Daniel's voice cracked. Greed. Greed. I cut corners. I chased expansion. And when the crash came, it took everything. My company collapsed. My investors sued me. My family walked away. Thought I could fix it all with money? But money was the one thing I didn't have anymore." He looked down at his worn hands. "I ended up here, on the streets, the ghost of the man I was." The twist of fate. Alexander was stunned. "So all this time, you were teaching me what you couldn't teach yourself?" Daniel gave a broken smile. "I saw myself in you, the same hunger, same blindness, and I thought, maybe if I helped you, it would mean my own fall wasn't for nothing." Alexander felt his throat tighten. This wasn't just mentorship. This was redemption, Daniel's way of saving himself by saving another. A promise made Alexander gripped his shoulder firmly. "No, Daniel, you're not a ghost. You're the reason I'm still standing. You gave me back my son, my brother, my integrity. I won't let you vanish into the streets." Daniel shook his head. "I don't belong in your world anymore." Alexander leaned closer, eyes burning. "Then we'll build a new one, together. You said I had to fix it. Now it's my turn. Let me fix this for you." For the first time since they'd met, Daniel's eyes filled with tears, and Alexander knew the next chapter wasn't about saving his empire anymore. It was about saving Daniel. The revelation about Daniel haunted Alexander. For weeks he couldn't stop thinking about the cruel irony. One man who had everything and lost it all, now guiding another man who still had everything but was about to lose it. Alexander had taken Daniel's advice to fix himself. Now he knew his task was to help fix Daniel. The shelter visit the next morning. Alexander did something he'd never done before. He visited the homeless shelter Daniel sometimes stayed in. The director nearly fainted when she saw him walk through the door. "Mr. Kane? This is unexpected." Alexander held up his hand. "I'm not here for publicity. I'm here for him." He nodded at Daniel, who sat quietly in a corner. Embarrassed, Alexander made a bold declaration to the director. "From today forward, I'll fund every bed, every meal, every program in this shelter. No one here will ever be turned away." Daniel looked up, stunned. "It's not charity," Alexander said firmly. "It's investment in people who still matter." The business world reacts. When the press got wind of Kane's involvement in homeless rehabilitation, the headlines spread like wildfire. "Fallen billionaire lifts others instead of himself." For once, the coverage wasn't about scandals or lawsuits. It was about redemption. Investors began to notice something new. People actually believed in Kane again, not because of money, but because of character. And behind it all, Daniel remained Alexander's silent advisor, though he resisted being in the spotlight. The offer one night. In his office, Alexander laid a contract in front of Daniel. "I want you to come back," he said. "Not as a ghost of who you were, but as a partner in who I'm becoming. Daniel frowned. A partner? Building a new foundation, Alexander explained. Not for profits, for rebuilding live shelters, rehabilitation training. Programs, you'll run it with me? Who better than someone who's lived it? Daniel's hand shook as he touched the papers. Alex, you don't understand. The world knows me as a failure. My name, your name, Alexander interrupted, is the reason this matters. You've been through the fire, you survived, and now you'll help others do the same. The rescue complete. Weeks later, the Kane Morris Foundation launched. Cameras flashed, reporters asked endless questions, but Daniel stayed humble, often avoiding the stage. Yet his influence was everywhere in the programs designed with compassion, in the shelters upgraded with dignity. In the quiet way, people found hope where before there was only despair. One journalist asked Alexander, "Why put a fallen CEO at the helm of your foundation?" Alexander answered with a steady smile, "Because no one understands rebuilding better than someone who's been broken." And just like that, Daniel was no longer a ghost. He was alive again. Months passed. The Kane Morris Foundation grew into something larger than anyone expected. What started as a shelter initiative spread into education programs, job placements, and recovery projects across the city. Alexander had rebuilt his empire not with profits, but with purpose. And Daniel had stepped out of the shadows, slowly reclaiming the dignity he thought was gone forever. But redemption is never safe from trials. The crisis returns one morning. News broke that a rival corporation was accusing Kane Industries of mishandling funds in its foundation. Old whispers of corruption resurfaced, and investors panicked again. Alexander's advisors begged him, "Distance yourself from the foundation, sir. Protect the company." But Alexander shook his head. "I won't. This foundation is my company." Now, privately though, he feared was this his chance to prove he had truly changed. Or was history about to repeat itself? Daniel stayed late. At night, Daniel walked into Alexander's office. "You're scared?" he said gently. Alexander exhaled. "What if this ruins everything? What if people say we were just two failed men pretending to be saviors?" Daniel smiled faintly, then let them talk. "You once told me it wasn't about saving an empire, it was about saving lives. Stick to that. If you do, no scandal, no rival, no storm can undo what you've built." For the first time, it wasn't Alexander fixing Daniel. It was Daniel fixing Alexander. The testimony when the hearings came, Alexander didn't send lawyers. He appeared in person with Daniel by his side. He faced the cameras, the questions, the accusations, and spoke plainly. "Yes, I was a man who once cared more for money than people. And yes, I failed. But I learned from a man who lost everything. That failure is not the end, it's a beginning. Its foundation is not a shield for profit, it is a promise. Check the records, audit the books, we welcome it, because for once in my life, I have nothing to hide." The room fell silent. Even the harshest critics struggled to argue with truth spoken so openly. Full circle weeks later, the accusations crumbled. The rivals' smear campaign was exposed, and public faith in Kane Morris soared higher than ever. But for the two men, victory wasn't in the headlines. It was in the quiet moments. Alexander having dinner with his son, Matthew laughing. Without tension for the first time in years, Michael, his brother, stopping by the foundation's office. No longer an estranged stranger, but a partner and family again. Daniel walking into the shelter, not as a broken man looking for a bed, but as a leader welcomed with gratitude. On a quiet evening, standing on the rooftop where it all began, Alexander turned to Daniel. "You once told me I had to fix it. Did I?" Daniel smiled, the city lights reflecting in his eyes. "You did more than fix it. You became the man I couldn't be." Alexander shook his head. "No, Daniel. You became the man you were always meant to be." They stood in silence. Two men who had lost everything, found more than they ever imagined.